Hi, everybody. Welcome. I know that sometimes we have technical issues, so before we start, I'd like to give people some time to make their connections work. It's my experience that technology can be a useful partner, but it sometimes has a mind of its own. So let's wait maybe for a couple of more seconds. And thanks in advance for your patience. Okay, so let's start. For those who have just joined us and the people who have already joined us as well, of course, thank you for joining our webinar about how you can measure and improve D&I in recruitment. I am very excited to notice that D&I has moved away from being a nice-to-have to a must-have for many companies. And the way I see it is that the TA teams are at the forefront of this big shift. After all, you're the ones who source, manage, and select the candidates. You're key to reaching your company's diversity and inclusion goals. And during that process, you're expected to deliver an inclusive experience to your candidates. So TA teams face a big responsibility in driving these D&I goals. And the good news is that we're here to help you achieving those goals, engaging whether it's heading at the right direction. In case you're still finding the right D&I practices, I'd like to recommend you to check out our inclusive hiring checklist. You can see the link in the chat. So in this webinar, I would like to go through the content. We're happy to show you how you can use experience data to measure and improve your D&I approach. Let's get into what you can expect. So what the structure is of this webinar. First, we will let you know what you will learn. And then I'd like to share a bit about START, myself, and Sophie. We'll follow up with the D&I challenges we've identified. And after that, we'll arrive at the core and most important part of the webinar that Sophie will cover. So that is about how you can measure diversity and inclusion and why that should be an important part of your D&I practices. We'll wrap up with some takeaways and conclude with a Q&A session. I'd like to encourage you to ask questions. We'll be more than happy to answer them. And if you'd like to have a follow-up conversation on this important topic, you can reach out to our colleague Maggie. We will share her contact details through a link in the chat. So what is it that you'll learn from this webinar? Again, we want to show you why measuring inclusivity is important, because you want to reduce conscious bias in your hiring practices as much as possible. And you can only know this, that you've actually achieved them by asking your questions if you have delivered a respectful experience to them. And by measuring their perceived experiences consistently, you can keep the finger on the pulse. So in this webinar, we'd like to show you two stories addressing questions like, do your inclusion scores vary by gender and ethnicity? Do underrepresented demographics feel they are treated respectfully? And are there recruiters or hiring managers perhaps who could benefit from extra D&I training? But before we get to the core of our webinar, you may wonder by now who we are. So apologies for a delayed introduction, but I am Joteng Pat, Head of Marketing at START. Nice to meet you. And Sophie, who will address how you can measure inclusion and act on that, is START's Customer Success Manager. Sophie is an expert in helping companies like Robinhood, Twilio, and Elastic to deliver outstanding candidate experience through START. Our platform collects and measures candidate experience for more than 5 years now. And because it is our mission to give people a voice to improve their work life. So we currently help enterprises like Coca-Cola and PricewaterhouseCoopers, but also fast-growing tech companies like Dropbox, Sprinkler, and SoundCloud to hire at scale, but without losing the human touch by respecting the voices of their candidates. We view that as a form of active listening. And we also believe that active listening is how you should approach diversity and inclusion. So it was a natural next step for START to launch a D&I module to sit on top of our candidate experience solution. And besides offering a D&I solution to help other companies, at START, obviously, we care about D&I. On a practical level, this means that I interact with one of the most diverse group of colleagues I've ever worked with. When we are in the office, we regularly indulge in international snacks, ranging from Italian cookies to Persian delights. And from a gender distribution point of view, 50% identify as male and 48% identify as female. So let's go back to your challenges. What are they exactly? Well, we've been listening to our customers, and at the start, we are very fortunate to work with companies that put D&I at the forefront of their recruiting operations. And what we've heard many times is that while many have put a D&I policy in place, they find it hard to set the right metrics for inclusion. It's easier to put goals and metrics on the diversity of your candidate pipeline, for example, by using your ATS. But when it comes to inclusion, this seems more complicated and challenging. We believe that the only way to tackle this challenge is to actually ask your candidates if they feel a sense of belonging and feel they are treated respectfully in their journey with you. So another challenge is that once you've set the right metrics and you see that some D&I results do not meet your standard, you'd like to know more. And at this point, you just want to dig deeper and find out what the causes are. So Sophie, please take us from here and explain that you can measure inclusion and how you can do that, and expand maybe what you could do with these insights.
Yes, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Yoteng. So measuring inclusivity is a two-step approach. First, you need to collect demographic data from your candidates when they enter the funnel. Secondly, you need experience data in order to understand how your candidates feel about the recruitment process with you. Solely analyzing your demographic data will give you insights into the diversity of your talent pool, but it will tell you nothing about how inclusive your hiring practices are. In order to measure inclusivity, you need to enrich your demographic data with experience data. With START, you can automate your feedback process to measure candidate experience throughout all stages of your candidate journey. With our D&I module, you can enrich your experience data with your previously collected demographic data. This allows you to not only measure candidate experience, but taking it one step further, measuring how inclusive your hiring practices are based on candidates' demographics. So what do I mean when I talk about experience data? It's feedback from your candidates that you collect when they leave your funnel. As mentioned before, with START, you can fully automate this feedback process by sending a survey to your candidates when you mark them as rejected, withdrawn, or hired in your ATS. You can ask them questions around how they experience the application process, working with a recruiting team and hiring team, but even questions specifically around inclusivity. So you might have set targets around recruiting more females into your organization or increasing the number of new hires from underrepresented groups. Solely looking at your demographic data, you will have insights into the number of females entering your funnel and ultimately the number of females who are hired, and also the number of females who've chosen to withdraw. And the same goes for different races and ethnic groups. Looking at your demographic data alone, you will have insights into the diversity of your talent pool. But without the experience data, you can only guess how underrepresented groups feel about your hiring practices. Let's take a look at our inclusion dashboard and segment experience data on race and gender and see what biases we may uncover. So before I get started with demoing this dashboard, let me tell you that all the data you're about to see is fictional data based on real-life trends that we have seen with our customers. All data is also completely anonymous at all times. So the first thing that you'll see in the dashboard are a few filters. So a date range filter, so you can segment on a specific time period, and a filter for each of the specific demographics. So for example, you might be asking your candidates questions around EEO. So we have the gender, disability, veteran status, and ethnicity filter. And if you're a greenhouse customer and you also have custom demographic questions enabled, we're also able to pull those. So for example, here is a question around sexual orientation. We always add a survey filter to the dashboard, and this is because your hired candidates will have a different experience than candidates who are rejected or candidates who've chosen to withdraw. So it's always important to segment on each of these different audiences. We can pull many other fields from your ATS directly into this dashboard. So you can filter on individuals such as recruiters, coordinators, and hiring managers. But you can also filter on aspects such as department, office, region, job name. This is all customizable to your wishes. So the first thing that we show is always the NPS, the Net Promoter Score. NPS is a very important metric when you're measuring candidate experience, and it's calculated based on one single question that you're asking each candidate, regardless of whether they have they're rejected, they've chosen to withdraw, or they're hired. And the question is how likely they are to recommend you to others based on their application experience. Candidates can answer this question from 0 to 10, so it's an 11-point skill question. Candidates who score between a 0 and 6 are called detractors, so they're not very likely to recommend you. Candidates who score a 7 or 8 are passives, and candidates who score a 9 or 10, we call those promoters. The NPS is calculated by subtracting the percentage of detractors from the percentage of promoters, yielding an absolute number ranging from a -100 to a +100. And the higher, the better. Besides showing the NPS score and the distribution, we also show the average response rate, the number of responses, and the satisfaction score, which is the average satisfaction for each 1 to 10 skill question from your survey. Next up is the individual questions within your survey and the average score for each of those. So as I mentioned before, you can ask your candidates questions specifically around inclusivity. So for example, a question around belongingness. The recruitment team made me feel very welcomed and that I belong at the company. Question around interview atmosphere. Do you feel we provided an environment to freely and openly express your ideas and opinions during the interview? And respectful hiring. I was treated with respect during the interview. Besides the questions on inclusivity, you can also ask questions on the experience with working together with the recruitment team, the hiring team, and also questions around the application process. And this is where it gets interesting. So now that you know how NPS is calculated, you can now also segment on each of the different demographics. So you can see what the NPS score is for each of the ethnicity, and also the trend over time. And the same goes for all of the other demographics. So gender, veteran status, disability, and sexual orientation. Besides the NPS, because that's only calculated based on one question, you also would like to understand, of course, what is the average satisfaction for all of the other questions. So here again, you can see the average satisfaction for each of the demographics: ethnicity, gender, veteran status, disability, and sexual orientation. We also show the response rate for each demographic. And lastly, we're also able to segment and slice and dice based on your data to show you even more granular results. So if you're interested to understand, hey, how is a specific recruiter influencing certain demographics, or a specific hiring manager, you can even get down to that individual level. So now I'm going back to the top of the dashboard, and I'd like to take you back to one of the stories from previously. So as a goal, you might have set to increase the number of hiring more females into your organization. In order to understand how females feel about your hiring process, it's important to segment specifically on this demographic. So based on your the input that you have from candidates who apply, you can see how many females are applying and how many females are leaving the funnel. But that data alone doesn't tell you anything about how females experience the recruitment process with you. So in order to understand that, you can use D&I dashboards to filter specifically on the females. And then in this example, I'm particularly interested in understanding why do females withdraw, and is there anything that we could do to prevent the withdrawal? So here you can select the two surveys, the survey sent to females who have withdrawn after interview and withdrawn after offer. So selecting these segments, And we give the dashboard a second to show the results. We'll show you that females who've chosen to withdraw show a lot lower NPS score. So the average was a -4, and here you see a -28. Same goes for the average satisfaction score. So it's a 6.7, which is lower than the overall average of all your candidates. And now it's important to also see how you're doing on each of the individual questions that you're asking females. Here you can see that the questions around inclusivity score quite low. As you now know, this is a 10-point scale question. So for example, a question around respectful hiring, I was treated with respect during the interview, has a 4.6 average. So then you understand, hey, there's something that is happening within the interview process that is making females feel uncomfortable and not respected. This will give you the information to make changes to your interview process. I'm now going to take off these filters, and I'm going to the second story, which is hiring more candidates from underrepresented groups. So for this example, I am going to select the Hispanic or Latino ethnicity. And let's see what the dashboard shows then. So here again, the NPS score is a little bit lower than the average, and so is the satisfaction score. So you can look at these insights only, and again, also at the individual questions, but when it comes to analyzing your results, you're as strong as your weakest link. So it's important to understand what aspect or which individual might be influencing these scores. So for this, I'd like to take you to the recruiter and hiring manager matrix, which I showed you before. Here you can actually see on an individual level for the Hispanic or Latino ethnicity, how candidates are scoring the hiring managers and recruiters. So for example, hiring manager Alex and Frank, they have a low NPS score and a low average rating, whereas David has a higher NPS score and a higher rating. So looking at your average will not tell you anything about what made up that average score. But looking at those individuals, you can see, hey, what is bringing down my average and who might need some more training in order to increase and move the needle on that NPS and average score. And ultimately, of course, as it's not about scores, providing an inclusive hiring experience for all your candidates. I also have customers who don't feel comfortable getting down to an individual level, but are more interested in filtering down on, for example, department level or region level or office level. As this dashboard is completely customizable to your needs and wishes, we can build this according to those. So that's it for the dashboard. Let's get back to the slides and take a look at the takeaways. So in this day and age, inclusivity is a must, not a nice to have. Having a D&I statement on your careers page is not enough. However, many companies are struggling to measure inclusivity amongst their candidates. Measuring inclusivity does not have to be difficult. It really only consists of 2 data points, the demographic data, which most of you already have, and the experience data. And with Star's D&I module, you can start uncovering unconscious biases to create an equitable and inclusive hiring experience for all your candidates.
Thanks, Sophie. Thanks so much for explaining everything. And it's really exciting and reassuring at the same time that, diversity and inclusion goals are not an elusive, an unattainable goal for the TA team. So I haven't identified any questions yet, but feel free to ask any questions because we're now entering our Q&A session here. So let me see. Oh, I do see one question pop up. Yeah. So Cassie asks, as a Start user, is it easy to integrate the NI dashboard onto your current dashboard?
Yeah, good question. So we have the general candidate experience dashboard, which is similar to the D&I dashboard, but instead of being able to filter on the different demographics, you can filter on things like recruiter name, job name, etc. For the D&I module, we do build a separate dashboard because it's very important to remain anonymous at all times. So that's why we don't show any comments, for example, because that sometimes makes it possible to lead it back to an individual. And we really separate that in a different dashboard that we can embed within your Start account.
Okay, let me check if there are any other questions. Yes, I've got a question from Alessandra. Thanks for, I'm going to read it out loud for you, Sophie. Thanks for the insights. Can you create your own D&I questions? Is the question.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Start surveys are completely customizable. So you can always think about what kind of questions you want to ask. We do propose a few best practice questions, which we've seen our customers are very successful with, but they're completely customizable. So you can also create your own.
Actually, if you don't mind me asking, Sophie, I also have a question. Like, there's a difference between Europe and US. So for example, the sensitivities in Europe are that ethnicity is something that we are a bit, that we stay away from it. So how are there other, like aspects within DNY that you can still address if you're, let's say, an European TA consultant? Or TA, sorry, recruiter.
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing is with the survey questions, right, that I shared before around did you feel respected during the interview process, those types of questions you can always ask using the Start survey. So even if you don't have that demographic data, you can still see how candidates feel and what sort of region they come from, for example, what the location is. You can really dig down on all of those fields that you have in your ATS that we're able to pull into Start. So even without all of the more or less sensitive data, you can still get those actionable insights on how candidates feel around inclusivity.
Great, thanks. I don't know if we have more questions. Let me go through the question section. No, I think this is about it. I think we can wrap up. Sorry, I'm now trying to see. Yes. So, then I would like to thank everyone. Thank you to the audience for attending, and thank you, Sophie, for explaining everything so clearly. I just want to thank the audience for spending time with us. We always feel inspired to talk about D&I and feel privileged if we could somehow contribute to your D&I ambitions. In our chat, you can, as a thank you, I would say, we will leave in our chat a link to our D&I guide. We're very proud of it. It's kind of comprehensive. So feel free to use that if you need any tips or inspiration to move forward on your goals. And if you are looking to continue this conversation, to have a follow-up with us about measuring inclusion and helping you to make it more evidence-based and data-driven, then please, you can reach out to our colleague, Maggie. We will share her contact details through a link in a chat. And then I just want to thank you again and wish you a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.